right now. Thank you for making the accommodation. Thank you for being willing to sort of engage virtually today. Starting on Monday, we'll be face-to-face, and my hope is we'll be face-to-face through the entirety of the semester. We had that strange period last fall where we were split in half for several weeks. Hopefully we'll avoid that this semester, though you need to be aware that that's always a possibility. If infection rates go up, if we have COVID issues, then we might have to split into that 24 and 24 configuration again. But hopefully not, because since the fall semester, we've learned a lot about how infection spreads. We've learned a lot about how to manage our COVID protocols a little bit better. So we'll see. I'll always try to give you sufficient notice if anything is changing in regard to meeting times or configurations or any of those sorts of things. But hopefully we can go through most of this semester on the yellow level and engage with one another with the full class in the same room together. Hopefully there's light around the corner. 2020 has taught us never to presume that things are going to be okay. Anything can happen, but good news is coming out regarding vaccines, and as those continue to circulate around the country, my sincere hope and prayer is that this will be our last COVID-19 semester, at least our last very critical COVID-19 semester. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see how things unfold. And certainly with us being in the final stretch, we don't want to relax our vigilance at this point. It would be sad to have issues we don't have to have when maybe we're in the final stretch. So all the things that applied last semester still apply this semester in terms of masking, in terms of social distancing, in terms of just doing those common sense things that we all can do to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Today is going to be primarily about looking at the syllabus and talking through what the course is going to look like this semester. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I will go through some critical things related to the structure of the class and the nature of what we'll be doing this semester. And then, like I said at the beginning, I will leave some time for you to ask some questions. And in fact, I may pause along the way also at certain points to let you chime in if you would like. If you do have a question and you'd like to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, and I'll be glad to try to clarify anything that may be murky or not quite as clear as it needs to be. To start with, of course, this is Modern Western Culture in Global Context, Core 145, Section 04. I often joke when we're actually on campus face-to-face that if you were supposed to be going somewhere else and you ended up by accident with us, you might as well just stay with us, because what we're going to be doing is more fun than what anybody else is doing anyway. In this particular case, if you stumbled onto a Zoom room by accident, then you really are a gifted person and you should definitely stay with us. The time, of course, is there, 12 o'clock to 12:50. Normally, our home is going to be in classroom building, classroom number 1144. Below that, there is my information. My name, of course, my office number is CL 1125. If you want to find my office, you basically walk out of our classroom, take a right and go down towards the copy center. The history pod is down there. Normally it's where you hear all the noise. We're not there quite as often as we were previously because of COVID, but when we are there, it's usually pretty loud and boisterous, so you can find us easily. My office phone number is there should you need to call, and I do have messaging service attached to it if you need to leave a message. My email is probably the quickest way to get in touch with me, actually, because I check it often throughout the day, and I check it when I'm away from my office as well. So it's probably the quickest way to get a message to me if you need to. For office hours this semester, my office hours are going to be from 2 to 3, which is immediately after the other section of this course on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then from 11 to 1 o'clock Tuesday, or by appointment. If you can't make those times and you need to discuss something with me, don't let timing issues prevent you from getting the assistance you need. Dort is a small campus, and one of the virtues of a small campus is that you have ready access to your professors. So certainly feel free to contact me if you need to schedule a time outside of that window, and I can make it happen. As last semester, a lot of our face-to-face interactions or a lot of our office hours interactions are actually occurring virtually, just simply due to the fact that the more you minimize those contacts, the more you're able to control the spread of COVID-19. Now, having said that, I can definitely meet face-to-face if you need to. Just let me know and we can schedule a time to do that. But there will be times during my office hours when I'll be remote. And when you want to join during those times, just use the meeting ID that's here on the syllabus and the passcode Madison, as in James Madison, 4th President of the U.S. And it's just that easy. You'll use the same code that you used to get on today, and I'll be glad to converse with you. Sometimes it may take a minute or two if you try to join, because during those office hours, I may be doing other things using my computer as well. And so I'll have the email popped open so I can see when you come in. It may take me a second to join because I may not have the Zoom screen up. I may have another program running. So if that's the case, just give me a second and I will be with you as quickly as I can. So we are in different times and they're strange times, but don't let them prevent you from making contact with me if you need to throughout the semester. I'm always glad to visit with you, always glad to talk with you, and glad to make whatever accommodations are needed to give you the opportunity to discuss the things that are on your mind. Course description. This course is the continuation of Core 140, and you really don't have to say a lot more than that, but of course we will. It is a study of the emergence of modern and contemporary Western culture in its increasingly global context. Prerequisite, of course, is Core 140 or permission from the instructor. And if you are taking the courses out of sequence, you're not at a great disadvantage. There may be some things you have to catch up on, but for the most part, you could take either 140 or 145 first and still be in pretty good shape because they are continuous, they are connected, but they are also self-contained in a number of ways as well. Essentially, we're continuing the story that we began to explore in Core 140 with this course. And in this particular course, we start around 1500, and we look very much at how Western cultures begin to branch out into the wider world and how they fit into that increasingly global context. By the time we get to the 21st century at the end of the course, we are most definitely living in a, quote, global society. And actually, that's where I would leave it if I was talking about all of this a few years ago. When I first started teaching at Dordt in 2012, that was the coda. That was the final part of the course. You'd say, okay, we're living in an increasingly global context where national boundaries and barriers are kind of starting to become more permeable, and that seems to be the wave of the future. Well, it's several years later now, and interesting things are happening around the world. We're seeing sort of a pushback against globalization, and it remains to be seen whether those movements are something new or whether they're kind of the last gasp of something old. So we'll talk about that as we get closer to the end of the course. Are we seeing some kind of revitalized pushback against globalization that will sort of turn things back to a previous status? Or is this simply the last gasp of a passing order before something new emerges? It's hard to tell right now. And in fact, it may be several decades before we know for sure. So that's what we're doing. We're basically marching from the age of the Renaissance and the Reformation forward to the 21st century, and doing so from a Christian perspective. A lot of the things here on the syllabus in these first few pages are meant to give context so that you know how Core 145 fits into the wider core program here at Dordt. In many ways, the course is doing its own thing, but in other ways, it's also laying a foundation for what's to come in your future core classes, especially classes like Core 150, Core 200, classes that talk a lot about philosophy and theology. But then also we get into questions of biology and the development of scientific methodology. So it's also setting a foundation for your future studies in those courses as well. I'll let you look at those things on your own time. There's quite a bit here, and if you're interested in how it fits into Dort's unique perspective on higher education, then I encourage you to take some time to read through it. For our purposes, however, we're going to jump down a little bit to the page that is labeled on the syllabus document, page 4. Now, I've already sent you electronic copies of this. Also, electronic copies of the syllabus are posted on Canvas. And I will give you a hard copy on Monday when we're face-to-face so that you'll have those to refer to also if you would like. Required text for the semester. 2 of them are repeat text, which is really good because you save some money that way. Frankfurter and Spellman's The West, A Narrative History. That one you used last semester. we're using it again. We'll just be looking at the last half of that text. So if you had it, hopefully you held on to it, because you'll be getting your money's worth out of it using it again this semester. This text basically serves as the narrative backdrop to what we're doing in class. It'll help you get ready for each class session by looking at the readings that I've got for you on the course schedule. And it's a great review for your test when you come to your exams. It's great to go back and look at certain items and review them in more depth. And there are some things that we won't get time to talk about in class that you also will see in those readings that will give you a little bit more context for the things that we're doing in class. Wells, History Through the Eyes of Faith. You're also familiar with this one from last semester if you took 140 or whenever you did take 140. And this one, again, is one Christian historian's ideas about how one engages with history as a Christian. It's not the only way you can do it as a Christian, and he's the first one to tell you that, but it provides ideas about how we as believers can look at the flow of human history, the flow of the human story from a Christian perspective. We'll actually be using Wells a little bit more in this class than we did in the first class, because if you look at the way it's structured, it's definitely more weighted towards the modern period. Part of that is because Wells himself is a historian of American history, primarily he's a historian of early America and 19th century America. And so that's his focus. Therefore, he tends to provide more on that later period. So we'll be using Wells at several points to help us reflect on how do we as Christians engage with a particular piece of history that we're looking at. There are two other texts you want to get your hands on as well. All of you fondly remember your engagement with Plato and Augustine last fall. I'm sure it's one of the highlights of your academic career. Well, we do something similar in Core 145, and for our purposes this semester, we're going to be comparing the thought of Edmund Burke, who is an 18th century British parliamentarian, with that of Thomas Paine, who was one of the primary leaders of the American Revolution, and then later became a central figure in the French Revolution as well. The two texts are Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France and Paine's The Rights of Man. These guys are talking about the same thing in their text. So one thing about this particular primary source assignment that's a little bit easier than the Plato-Augustine comparison is they are intentionally debating the same topic, and that topic is the French Revolution. Is it a good idea? Does it have good directions in terms of its initial foundations? And where is it going? And they have very different thoughts about that. Both of these men were very fervent supporters of the American Revolution, which is remarkable for Burke because he was actually an English parliamentarian, but he opposed King George III's attempt to coerce the American colonies to pay more taxes. He felt that the Americans had a point as they were beginning to contemplate breaking away from the mother country. So both of those men were very invested in the American Revolution and had positive views about it. Paine is actually the one who came up with the term, coined the term, the United States of America. He's the one that came up with that name. But when it came to the French Revolution, they had very different ideas. They disagreed sharply. And it's often said that their differing views on the French Revolution helped define the roots of the contemporary perspectives of conservatism and progressivism, that their different perspectives still sort of lie at the heart of those different political philosophies. So we're going to look at their debate, give you a chance to analyze it critically, and see how it plays out in actual lived historical experience. So you'll want to acquire both of those books. They're relatively cheap. Both of them are less than $10. So you need to get your hands on them as well, and you'll be using them later in the semester. Any and all of these should be available already at our bookstore. Let me know if you have any problems acquiring them, and I'll be glad to help smooth the way for that. I have a note here beneath the text that says that essentially what I do is have you refer back to the text whenever it comes time for the sectional exams. We'll talk about those in just a moment. I say that on the exams, at least 10% of the questions can be drawn from our reading assignments. I don't do daily quizzes, and that stems from my experiences as an undergrad. In my experience with daily quizzes, they sometimes help with people's reading, but what happens very often is you can get the best students doing the reading every day for 2 weeks, and you may or may not have a pop quiz. And then on the one day when something comes up and they can't do the reading, you have the pop quiz. So I've never really loved the idea of pop quizzes. So I don't do that. But as far as the reading accountability, what I say is you do need to have everything in that section read by the time that we do each section exam, because it's fair game for the test. That gives people time, if they get behind a little bit, to catch up within that section. Let's move on down to evaluation. Now, I know you guys are just doing this for the pure enrichment that flows from engaging with historical themes and ideas. I know grades, course credit, all of that is secondary to you. But just in case you do care about those things and would like to get some credit towards graduation, these are the items on which you'll be evaluated for this semester. First of all, much like in Core 140, 2 section exams, each worth 100 points, and a final exam worth 130 points. My exams are typically a combination of objective questions and essay. Usually the objective consists of fill in the blank and some completion and matching as well. And then an essay question that asks you to look over the course of the section we've just completed and talk about some of the bigger ideas and themes that we've explored. The final exam is a little bit longer and worth more points because usually there's an additional essay question. That essay question has a comprehensive scope, and usually you're well prepared for it by the time we get there. So if that sounds a little bit intimidating now, don't let it intimidate you. We do a pretty good job of getting you ready for that so that you can handle it effectively at the end of the semester. So first of all, you have 2 section exams and a final exam. So in essence, the semester is going to be divided into 3 sections. Second, a 4 to 5 page primary source analysis of the debate between Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine over the French Revolution. Students will read Edmund Burke's reflections on the Revolution in France, and Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man. In the paper, the students will compare Burke's argument to Paine's, giving their educated critique of each writer's position, pointing out the strengths and weaknesses of their argumentation. 100 points, it'll be due March 12th by 5:00 p.m., and it will be submitted through Canvas electronically. More on that, of course, as we get closer to it. This, again, is very similar to what you did with Plato and Augustine. The sources are slightly longer. And in fact, I'll probably give you a couple of sections of Burke that you won't have to worry with because they're a little bit repetitive. I think you get the main point of his argument without delving into some of those sections. So I'll give you more information about that over the next couple of weeks. But essentially, this is what you're doing with them, the same thing you did with Plato and Augustine. You're comparing their ideas, talking about the strengths and weaknesses of their argumentation. Now, this next one I'm excited about because it's been a long time since I have been able to do films that are related to the history after 1500. So I'm excited about getting into films that are more recent in historical time, but I'm sad at the trade-off that we've had to make to have that happen. Normally we do a French Revolution simulation in the spring. I'm still going to try to work aspects of that into the class this semester so that at least some of it you get to do. But the full-blown French Revolution simulation is the very definition of a super spreader event. We are piled in together in the president's dining room at the Commons, so close together that if anybody had COVID, it would fly through the group like a knife through butter. So it's just not possible to do it under these conditions. And I'm sad about that because it is one of my favorite things to do. Hopefully we'll be able to engage in that exercise again. And like I said, I'm going to try to put aspects of that in the course this semester and do it to the best of our ability. But I didn't feel confident enough about that adapted form of it to make your grade dependent on it. So that's why I'm kind of going back to the film paper assignment. And it does give us a chance to look at some films that I have not really been able to use in a long time. For those of you that haven't had Core 140 with me, basically the film paper assignment is one that asks you to pick a film based on a recent event in history since 1500, relatively recent, and evaluate that film based on criteria that I give you here in the syllabus. This is just a page or two beyond the evaluation section we were just looking at. It's on pages 6 and 7. I say many historical events, cultures, personalities have been portrayed on film. Well, some films have done it well, others haven't done it quite as well, and even the ones that do it well, they have their challenges. So basically what I ask you to do is pick a historical film and evaluate it based on these criteria. How faithful is it to what historians argue actually happened? What actually happened if not? What ethical issues and moral challenges are introduced in the film? Does the film address issues of faith? And if so, how? Would you recommend this film to someone attempting to understand the culture or event under consideration? Why or why not? And why does the film's interpretation of the historical topic under consider? What does the film's interpretation of the historical topic under consideration tell us about our own cultural assumptions? This is the fun question. This is the Freudian question, because when they change the history in these films, they're doing it for us. They're doing it because there's something that they think we want to see. And very often they're catering to the desires of the audience when they do it. So what does the change tell us about who we are as a people, what we want to see as an audience, or at least what filmmakers think we want to see as an audience? For now, I'm still using historical films, although there are admittedly some fantastic series coming out on streaming services like Hulu and Netflix, which do a good job at probing historical topics as well. And if there was a good way to do it and keep it more contained, I might be tempted to do some of those. Maybe that'll happen in the future. For now, I've given you a menu of films that you could choose from for this assignment, and they include Elizabeth and Elizabeth the Golden Age, both of which deal with Elizabeth I, Mary, Queen of Scots, which is a newer film, just came out last year, and one that's pretty interesting in the way it approaches the story of Mary. If you were a fan of the series Reign on the CW, then you may already be familiar with one version, kind of a historical fictionalized version of who Mary, Queen of Scots was. This one deals more with her fate after she went to Scotland, and it's an interesting one. So if you're a fan of Reign, you may want to watch this one and compare the two different takes on Mary's life and influence. The Affair of the Necklace, which is an interesting film set on the eve of the French Revolution. It's about a major scandal that ends up engulfing Marie Antoinette and raises a lot of the criticism of her to a new level. She already was pretty despised in France. The Affair of the Necklace makes it even worse. And what's very tragic is it's not her fault. She didn't have anything to do with the Affair of the Necklace, but these con artists end up making her look like she's complicit in something that angers people throughout France. The Patriot is another Mel Gibson film. For those of you who did film papers in the fall, and we talked about some of the major themes of a Mel Gibson historical film, well, here they are again, except this time they deal with the early history of the American Revolution. 12 Years a Slave is a pretty profound film that delves into one man's experience with slavery and the horrible, haunting legacy that it has in American history and culture. Inherit the Wind deals with the Scopes trial, which occurred in 1925 and was supposedly a trial about creationism and evolutionary theory and whether evolutionary theory should be taught in public schools. And when you get to the story behind the trial, it's actually a pretty humorous story, and it illustrates the interesting relationship between faith and American popular culture. Because what really is going on is that this is a fabricated trial that the local boosters in Dayton, Tennessee created in order to get more tourism traffic in their part of Tennessee. And then it ends up getting away from them and becomes a national spectacle. It's hilarious. So the background is pretty interesting. The movie is interesting too, because it creates a certain legend of the Scopes trial that's only loosely based on the actual facts. Chariots of Fire is a film that depicts a Christian athlete who is a running champion by the name of Eric Liddell. It's a pretty interesting exploration of the challenges he faced as he competed in the Olympics in the early 1920s. 1917, Sam Mendes, a guy who, among other things, has done a Bond film recently. 1917 is a really interesting exploration of World War I. Valkyrie is one of my favorite World War II films, actually. It's an interesting one. It's got its flaws, but it's Bryan Singer's take on the plot to try to assassinate Hitler towards the end of World War II. This is not the same plot that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was involved in, but it's very similar to the one that he was involved in, and it'll give you some sense of sort of the underground opposition to Hitler towards the end of the war especially. So those are some of the films that you'll be able to choose from this semester. If there are others that are sort of near and dear to your heart and you think they would fit the bill, you're welcome to run those by me, and I might give you permission to do those as well. But these are ones that are pretty good topics to analyze, pretty good films to analyze, and I also know well the sources that go with them, so I can guide you in using the sources. As those of you know who did this last semester, you will use 3 primary sources and 3 secondary sources to analyze the film. The primary sources, of course, are sources as close to the event as possible that give us direct knowledge of what went on. Secondary sources are pretty much anything that tells the story based on the primary sources. They could be articles, books, documentaries, pretty broad array of different sources could fit the bill of secondary sources. This analysis is 5 to 7 pages in length, and it will be due submissible through Canvas on April the 16th. And for both of these paper submission days, you'll notice later in the course schedule, I've given you the day. You don't have class sessions that day so that you can put the finishing touches on these papers. For a map quiz on geographical areas associated with the civilizations we'll discuss in class. This is February the 10th. One practice map and the map for the test date will be provided by the professor. I will take care of this on Monday. You'll get both a physical copy of the syllabus and you'll get your practice map. The guide for the map is here at the end of the syllabus. On page 13, you have a map test study guide, Global Civilizations. And this gives you the places that you'll want to look for on that practice map. There's 65 locations here. I will give you 50 of them on the day of the exam, and you will locate them on the map that I pass out to you in class that day. You'll get a single point for each one of these locations you find, be worth 50 points total. These are all places associated with history that we're going to be exploring this semester. They often say that geography is destiny in human experience. Climate, topography, so many factors related to geography have a big influence over the way that history plays out. So it's worth knowing. It's worth knowing where places are and locating them where they belong. Try your best, I guess, to find the ones that are most obvious, and then hopefully you'll benefit from learning the ones that are a little bit less obvious that you may not have had much contact with previously. I promise that I will not be disappointed in any of your honest attempts to learn, though I do have to admit there was one point a few years ago when it was tough because I had a particular map test related to this same study guide where a student had put Mexico around North Carolina. And I thought at first that maybe they were trying to make some kind of political point. And I'm like, okay, maybe they're arguing some kind of political viewpoint. And then I noticed that Tokyo was in South America. And it was around that point that I decided, no, I just think they didn't look at this. So basically, this is a great opportunity to pick up some points early in the semester. Like I said, it'll be February the 10th. This is straightforward. You learn where these locations are and you tell me and you get 50 points for it. So on the one hand, 50 points may not sound like it's the entire store, but you never know when 50 points may come in very handy. So do take this seriously and probe where these locations are and be ready to give them back whenever it comes time for the map test. And that'll be a nice, easy way to pick up 50 points right at the beginning of the semester. Now, one last thing here under evaluation. Hopefully I'm not making you dizzy by jumping back and forth. Each student will be evaluated in terms of overall class participation based on the criteria stated below. And you can read that criteria below yourself. It relates to being very present in class, being aware, paying attention to what's going on, et cetera, being a good citizen of the class this semester. If you do that well and you participate in the class activities, you'll get 100 points for class participation. And I especially have this set at a pretty high level because, like I said, I am going to try to build back in some of the simulation activities during our classes. And so there will be days when we do some things that are a little bit more active. And I especially want to reward you for your participation on those days, because the more you're invested in it, the better it will be. We'll have a couple of debates over historical topics. We may end up executing a few people anyway, just for the fun of it, because, it has to happen. You talk about the French Revolution, heads roll. That's just the way it goes. So we may end up having a few ad hoc trials throughout the semester. So this is kind of to reward you for that. This is to reward you for those things outside of the formal submitted assignments that you do this semester that will enrich our experience in the class. Now, I'm going to take just a moment to pause and see if anybody's got questions about the assignments, grading, or any of that this semester. So if there's anything you would like to ask, feel free to unmute and ask away at this point. You can also send me a message on the chat, although I'm not quite as adept at jumping quickly from that to any questions. All right. Well, if there are any, I'll give you another opportunity at the very end. Let me talk about one or two more items, and then I'll try not to keep you longer than we need to today. Let's jump down a little bit further. Here's something on grading parameters for papers, academic assistance, all those things you can look at on your own time, and they do offer some tips about how you can get help outside of the class at the AEC. One of the policies that are kind of interesting for the history classes, the Core 145 and Core 140 classes, are the technology policy. The purpose of this is to kind of minimize some of the distractions that occur in classes. It's a standard policy across the board for all the Core 140 and 145 classes. So this is not just our class, it's every section. Basically, what we ask is during the normal course of class, when we are doing lecture or discussion, unless we're using them in some way, cell phones and laptop computers need to be stowed away somewhere. We encourage people to take notes by hand because, one, it's less distracting than if somebody's off task with their computer and people behind them are looking at something on YouTube they've pulled up in addition to what they're doing with their Word document. Two, we actually do think there's a pedagogical reason for that as well, that people who take notes have to translate more than people who are just typing on a computer. You can pretty easily copy every single word when you're typing on a computer, but you're not necessarily reframing it or digesting it in the same way that you have to when you're doing it by hand. So we do ask that. I know it seems a little bit strange, and especially right now because we're relying on technology so much, we're actually using it right now to do this. But that is sort of a thing that we establish in these classes, and it has worked pretty well for us. Now, of the four of us, I probably end up using technology the most. Professor Cosgrove does quite a bit as well at different points. So there will be days when I'll say, hey, have your phones, bring your computers out. There are things we're going to be doing with them. So it's not like technology is going to be absent from the course, but I do ask that you sort of abide by that law for the most part so that they're not distractions. I'll let you know when you can utilize those devices, and there will be times definitely when we do. So do feel free to bring them, but know when it's appropriate to have them out and to be using them. Certainly, if somebody has a special need for an accommodation, we can allow you to use the laptop for notes in that case. But aside from that, kind of ask you to abide by this standard so that we just have a little bit less distraction in the room than we might otherwise. I do say that if phones ring in class, the professor has the option to answer it. The flip side of that is if mine goes off in class, you can answer mine as well. You can tell my daughter why, we can't loan her money for a particular thing or whatever. I'll let you do that. Or more often or not, that it's a telemarketer who's calling and saying something along the lines of, hey, do you want to buy flood insurance in Louisiana? I'll be glad to let you guys talk to that person for me. So just some simple rules of decorum to guide us this semester and minimize distractions. Attendance policy is pretty straightforward. Anything you do for DORT is considered to be an excused absence. So if you're gone to a game, if you're in a debate tournament, if you've got some kind of field trip, all of that is considered excused. All I ask is that you let me know beforehand so that I can mark you as excused on the roll and so that I can help you make up anything that you miss. What I say here in the attendance policy is that you're allowed 3 unexcused absences, and then after that, they can affect your grade if it gets up to 4. Now, what I mean by that, by an unexcused absence, is just when you wake up, you look out the window and you're like, hey, you know, it looks kind of cold today. I think I'll just continue to sleep. That would be an unexcused absence. Anything you do in regard to sickness, in regard to some kind of DORT function, in regard to something reasonably necessary that would take you away from class, that would be an excused absence. This is usually not a problem. I've very seldom had anybody go over the total of unexcused absences, but do be aware of that as we're going forward throughout the semester. Notes on civility and decorum, you can look at that on your own time. That's not anything I expect us to have a problem with because DORT students are of a higher caliber. And so that's never been a serious issue in terms of our decorum falling apart. It is worth saying, especially in these times, that when we're looking at history, we're looking at different ways people have thought, believed, and acted throughout time, and there's a wide array of different philosophies we're going to explore. This is a very divisive time, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and as a historian, more than we've seen in quite a while, actually. My encouragement to you is to enjoy the benefit of being in a place like this where we can sort of walk into a laboratory of ideas and look at different things that people have believed, different things they have done, and sort of weigh the pros and the cons. Be kind to your colleagues. We're going to try to engage in very open debate and conversation about things that are important to us all. Have some grace for other students. You will not always agree. There will be things that you'll have different viewpoints on. Give other people a hearing as you would like to receive a hearing yourself. And at the very least, at the end of the day, if you don't end up agreeing with your colleagues, you may still learn something from them. So in terms of decorum, just remember that as we are engaging with these important ideas and thinkers. Now, the place I've stopped at here is the course schedule. It's towards the end of the syllabus document. And essentially what you've got here is the daily series of things we're going to be doing. You notice, of course, today is marked course introduction. When you look at the 18th, the measure of all things, that's the topic for the day. You'll notice those bold items there. W stands for Wells, F stands for Frankfurter. And those readings are readings to help you prepare for that day's class session. And you see that continuing through the first week. Now, since we're doing historical films and we're doing the film paper for 145 like we did for 140, I am going to actually use historical films as well. And these are all films that I think are important ones for you to see. And that's one reason why I do them in class, because you might not look at these on your own time. But when we're all together, it's a great opportunity to introduce you to some cultural products that do help us understand history a little bit better. So there is a definite pedagogical rationale for using these films this semester in class. But I'll also be very open and honest and tell you that there's also a health and mental fitness reason that I'm putting these in there as well. The spring semester is usually a time for us to take a deeper breath usually. Normally it's more relaxed than the fall. We'll see how it goes this semester, but my concern is that I don't think it's going to be, because we don't have a spring break. I know a lot of you are still kind of coasting on fumes from the fall semester. So these do have a pedagogical reason for being there, and you'll see how they fit into what we're doing. But also they are to provide some breathers for you throughout the semester. Now this first one comes pretty early, so it won't be as much for breathing purposes, but maybe it'll help you get oriented and get your feet on the ground at the beginning of the semester. I've got a couple more scheduled throughout the semester as well, because I think we're going to need it. I think we're going to need the time to kind of sit back and do something different at a couple of critical points in the semester. So the first one is Luther, and it's about Martin Luther, of course, and we'll be viewing it in a couple of weeks. And then we go on and we talk about early modern history. Your map test is going to be on the 10th. Like I said, that'll be the first graded assignment. So you'll want to be working towards that in the earliest weeks of the semester. We get to exam 1 on the 24th. And by that point, we'll be entering into what I call the age of revolutions. And you'll notice again, our second film will be Amazing Grace. This is a film about William Wilberforce and the British movement to end the slave trade within the British Empire. We'll be using that as a jumping off point to talk about not only slavery and the tragic legacy of slavery, but also talking about the early ideas that inspired a series of revolutions, starting with the American Revolution and extending throughout the 19th century to include a lot of different revolutions in Latin America and across Europe as well. We'll talk about the American Revolution, the French Revolution during this midpoint of the course. You notice that there's an open research day, no class. Burke and Payne papers will be due by 5 o'clock. That is the point where we're going to be moving into the conversation about the French Revolution. So when we come back, we'll be discussing the analysis of Burke and Payne that you've done in your comparison of their works. We'll come down to exam 2, March the 26th. We'll start talking about European imperialism, and our third movie is going to be The Last Samurai. I haven't used this one in years, and I enjoy using it, so I'm looking forward to getting back to it. There's some good conversations to be had exploring that film. It's a Tom Cruise entry from more years ago than I want to think now at this point, but early 2000s. I had a friend whose dad actually served as a military officer in Japan, and he took his son to the film, and he's like showing him all these different sites as the movie is rolling. He's like, Kevin, you see that? When you were 3 years old, we saw this and we saw that. This is where you grew up, Kevin. This is where you were a little kid. And so then the credits start rolling, and it gets to the end. There's a message towards the end of the credits that says, most outdoor scenes filmed in New Zealand. And Kevin's like, what are you talking about, Dad? It's like filmed in New Zealand. None of that stuff is in Japan. So he ended up giving his dad a hard time for a while. He's like, yeah, you're seeing things. You think you've been to those places. You've never been there. So we'll talk about The Last Samurai. The Last Samurai explores a very interesting episode towards the end of feudal Japan in the late 19th century and the emergence of modern industrialized Japan. And it raises some very important universal questions about empire, industrialization, and kind of the global order or global orders. Last part of the course, we get into the history of World War I, World War II, and hopefully in this last segment of the course, we help you make some sense out of the 20th and 21st centuries. And as you see, as we get towards the end, our last class session, we're going to try to focus a little bit on some of the opportunities and the challenges that stand before us now here in the early part of the 21st century. Historians always have to be careful about trying to be amateur prophets because we have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. If history teaches us anything, the unexpected is what's most likely to happen. But based on what we see in the past, maybe we can make at least some tentative forecasts and some tentative suggestions about where we go from here. So we'll see as we get towards the end of the semester what kind of insights we can bring towards that question as a class, what kind of combined wisdom we can discern as we both look at the past and the near future. So that's where we're going. That's what we're going to be about this semester. Any questions that you would like to ask at this point? Any questions? All right, well, I see none jumping out immediately, but I will also give you some time whenever we are face-to-face on Monday to ask any that may occur to you over the weekend. And certainly as we go ahead throughout the semester, you're very welcome to ask for any clarification you may need as well. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being flexible with this Zoom session today. Like I said, we'll try to do this as little as we possibly can, and hopefully we'll be face-to-face to the very end this time. I will post this recording for you later this weekend, so you can refer back to it if you need to. I hope you have a fantastic day, and look forward to seeing you face-to-face on Monday. Take care.